It began not with an empire, but with a dream born on the rugged Anatolian frontier. Here, in a land of shifting borders and clashing faiths, a small band of warriors under Osman I has set their sights on something greater than mere survival. They would unite the fractured lands, command the crossroads of the known world, and challenge the most powerful kingdoms of their age. For over 6 centuries, the Ottomans would rise in triumph and fall in tragedy, shaping the fate of continents. This is the story of ambition, power, and the relentless march of time, the story of the Ottoman Empire. The birth of Osman's vision. In the late 13th century, the remnants of the Seljuk Sultanate were crumbling, leaving Anatolia divided into countless small beyliks. Among them was the small but determined domain of Osman I, a leader whose courage and charisma drew warriors to his side. His people were frontier fighters, living on the edge of Christian Byzantium and Muslim Anatolia. They saw opportunity in the chaos and set their sights westward. Osman's raids were more than plunder. They were steps toward a greater destiny. By uniting rival tribes under his banner, Osman created a foundation that could grow beyond the scope of a single chiefdom. His warriors fought not just for wealth, but for faith and the promise of land. Local villages, weary of Byzantine neglect, found protection under his leadership. The early Ottoman identity began to form, a blend of Turkic traditions, Islamic governance, and pragmatic diplomacy. Osman's vision would pass to his son Orhan, but the seeds of empire had already been sown. Osman's death in 1324 marked the end of an era, but not of his ambition. Orhan took the mantle and wasted no time securing Bursa, a vital stronghold that would serve as the Ottomans' first true capital. With this victory came the beginnings of statecraft. Coinage was minted, administrative systems developed, and a growing army prepared for further expansion. The road to empire had begun. Expansion into Europe. The Ottomans understood that their future lay not only in Anatolia, but across the waters in the Balkans. The Byzantine Empire, once mighty, was a shadow of itself, its lands fragmented and vulnerable. In 1354, an earthquake damaged the fortress of Gallipoli, and the Ottomans seized it, their first permanent foothold in Europe. From there, their armies moved swiftly, establishing a presence that would alarm Christian rulers for centuries. Serbia and Bulgaria soon felt the weight of the Crescent banner. The Battle of Kosovo in 1389 became a defining moment, solidifying Ottoman dominance in the Balkans despite heavy losses. The Ottomans proved themselves relentless, willing to absorb setbacks and return stronger. Their military organization, including the disciplined Janissaries, gave them a formidable edge over rival armies. By the end of the 14th century, the Ottomans had transformed from a regional power into a true transcontinental force. Their territories spanned both Europe and Asia, controlling key trade routes and vital cities. The Byzantine capital, Constantinople, stood as the ultimate prize, a city that would define the next stage of their rise. The Conquest of Constantinople. In 1451, a young and determined sultan named Mehmed ascended the throne. He inherited not only a growing empire, but also the dream of conquering the greatest city in the medieval world. Constantinople had resisted centuries of sieges, its massive Theodosian walls standing as an impenetrable barrier. But Mehmed was no ordinary ruler. He was a strategist with vision and the will to achieve it. He brought forth massive cannons, cast in bronze, capable of shattering the ancient walls. He ordered a fleet to bypass the heavily defended Golden Horn by dragging ships over land on greased logs, a feat that stunned both allies and enemies. The siege was relentless, with the Ottomans pressing the city from all sides. On May 29, 1453, after 53 days of battle, the city fell. Constantinople became Istanbul, the new capital of the Ottoman Empire. The Hagia Sophia was transformed into a mosque, and the city became a thriving center of culture, commerce, and power. Mehmed the Conqueror had achieved what generations before him could only dream of: the Golden Age under Suleiman. In 1520, Suleiman ascended the throne, ushering in what many consider the empire's Golden Age. Known in the West as the Magnificent and in the East as the Lawgiver, Suleiman combined military genius with a passion for justice and the arts. His empire stretched from Hungary to the Arabian Peninsula, from North Africa to the Persian Gulf. Under his reign, the Ottoman legal system was reformed, balancing Islamic law with practical governance. Architecture flourished, with the great architect Mimar Sinan designing mosques and public works that still inspire awe today. Trade and culture thrived as Istanbul became a meeting point for merchants, scholars, and artists from across the world. Suleiman's military campaigns were as ambitious as his reforms. He expanded deep into Europe, nearly capturing Vienna in 1529, and secured Ottoman dominance in the Mediterranean through naval victories. Yet even at the height of power, seeds of future decline were quietly taking root. The power of the sea. The Mediterranean was a battleground of empires, and the Ottomans understood the importance of naval supremacy. Under Admiral Barbarossa, the Ottoman fleet became a force feared from Spain to the Levant. They clashed with the Spanish, Venetians, and the Knights of St. John, often emerging victorious. Naval power allowed the Ottomans to control trade routes and project influence far beyond their shores. North Africa came under their protection, and piracy against Christian ships was both a weapon and a source of wealth. Coastal cities flourished under Ottoman rule, benefiting from increased commerce and security. However, the Battle of Lepanto in 1571 dealt a blow to Ottoman naval prestige. Though they rebuilt their fleet quickly, the battle revealed that European powers were adapting and that Ottoman dominance was no longer unchallenged. Palace intrigue and succession struggles. The Ottoman court was a world of splendor, but also of shadowed corridors where power shifted in whispers and schemes. The harem, home to the Sultans' wives and concubines, was not just a place of leisure. It was a political arena where alliances were forged and rivals undermined. The role of the Grand Vizier was crucial, often holding the real reins of government while the Sultan indulged in luxury. Succession was rarely smooth. Brothers vied for the throne, and fratricide was an accepted, if brutal, means of securing stability. This constant tension weakened the leadership over time. As weak or inexperienced sultans rose to power, the empire became increasingly reliant on advisors and palace factions. The once disciplined administration began to fragment, allowing corruption and inefficiency to creep into the system. The first signs of decline. By the late 16th and early 17th centuries, the empire's expansion had slowed. The easy conquests of earlier centuries were gone, replaced by drawn-out wars with little gain. The treasury began to strain under the costs of maintaining vast armies and fleets. The influx of silver from the New World disrupted the economy, causing inflation and destabilizing trade. European powers, armed with new technology and naval prowess, began to outcompete the Ottomans in global commerce. The once invincible Janissaries grew complacent, resisting modernization and sometimes revolting against reforms. While the empire still held immense power, cracks in its foundations were becoming impossible to ignore. The balance between central authority and regional autonomy began to shift, with provincial governors acting more independently. The Siege of Vienna and European resistance. The year was 1683, and the Ottoman army stood at the gates of Vienna, the heart of Habsburg power. It was not their first attempt to take the city, but it would prove to be their most fateful. Led by Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, the Ottomans laid siege to the walls, confident in victory. Yet Europe had changed. Coalitions were forming, and the Christian states saw in Vienna's defense the chance to turn the tide against the empire. For 2 months, the Ottomans pressed their assault, tunneling under walls and bombarding the defenders. But a relief army led by the Polish king John Sobieski struck with decisive force. The Ottoman lines broke, and what had promised to be a gateway into Central Europe became the beginning of a long retreat. The failure at Vienna marked more than a lost battle. It was a signal to Europe that the Ottoman advance could be stopped. The Holy League formed soon after, driving the Ottomans from Hungary and weakening their control over the Balkans. The empire's military supremacy in Europe would never fully recover. Wars with Russia and losses in the north. While struggling in the west, the Ottomans faced a rising threat in the north, the expanding Russian Empire. The Black Sea, once an Ottoman lake, became a contested frontier. The Russo-Turkish wars of the 18th century were brutal, with battles fought over strategic fortresses and vital trade routes. The Treaty of Küçük-Kaynarca in 1774 dealt a heavy blow. Not only did the Ottomans lose territory in Crimea, but Russia gained the right to intervene on behalf of Orthodox Christians in the empire, a diplomatic dagger that would be used repeatedly in the centuries to come. The balance of power in Eastern Europe shifted decisively. These defeats were more than military setbacks. They were signs of a changing world. European armies, disciplined and technologically advanced, were outpacing the Ottoman military. The empire was now fighting to hold its borders rather than expand them. The Tanzimat reforms and modernization attempts. By the 19th century, Ottoman leaders recognized the urgent need for reform. The Tanzimat era, beginning in 1839, sought to modernize the empire's administration, military, and economy. Inspired by European models, these reforms promised equality before the law, new schools, and updated infrastructure. Railways, telegraphs, and modern weapons began to appear, but the reforms faced resistance from both conservative factions and nationalist movements. Some saw them as a betrayal of Islamic traditions, while others viewed them as too little, too late. Despite partial successes, the Tanzimat failed to halt the empire's fragmentation. As modern ideas spread, subject peoples in the Balkans demanded independence, and foreign powers used their influence to encourage rebellion. The reforms may have delayed the fall, but they could not prevent it. Nationalism and the Balkan breakaway. The 19th century was the age of nationalism, and nowhere did it burn hotter than in the Balkans. Inspired by the revolutions sweeping Europe, Serbs, Greeks, Bulgarians, and Romanians sought to break free from Ottoman rule. Each uprising drained the empire's strength and invited foreign intervention. The Greek War of Independence in the 1820s captured the world's imagination, with poets and politicians in Europe rallying to the cause. Serbia gained autonomy, followed by Romania, Bulgaria, and others. The Ottoman grip on Europe loosened, and with each loss, the empire's prestige faded. The Balkan Wars of 1912 to 1913 delivered the final blow to Ottoman Europe, leaving only a small foothold around Istanbul. What had once been a vast European domain was now reduced to a shadow of its former self. The Young Turks and the push for reform. By the early 20th century, frustration with the empire's stagnation boiled over. The Young Turks, a revolutionary movement of officers, intellectuals, and reformers, sought to restore the constitution and modernize the state. In 1908, they forced Sultan Abdulhamid II to reinstate the parliament, ushering in a new political era. The Young Turks promised renewal, but their rule was marked by political infighting and controversial policies. While they pursued modernization and secular governance, they also clamped down on dissent and struggled with ethnic tensions. The empire entered the new century with hope and uncertainty. The old order was gone, but whether the new one could save the Ottoman state remained in question. Events soon proved the challenge would be far greater than anyone had imagined. World War I and the final gamble. In 1914, the Ottoman Empire entered World War I on the side of the Central Powers. Leaders hoped an alliance with Germany would protect the empire from its enemies and perhaps restore lost territories. Instead, It plunged the state into a global conflict it could not win. The Gallipoli campaign became a rare moment of triumph as Ottoman forces under Mustafa Kemal repelled Allied landings in 1915. Yet elsewhere, the empire suffered devastating defeats. The Arab Revolt, supported by Britain, tore through Ottoman holdings in the Middle East, while Russian forces advanced in Anatolia. By 1918, the empire lay exhausted. Its armies shattered, its cities starving. It signed the Armistice of Mudros, effectively ending Ottoman participation in the war and sealing the empire's fate. Partition and occupation. After the war, the victorious Allies moved to carve up Ottoman territory. The Treaty of Sèvres in 1920 stripped the empire of nearly all its lands, dividing Anatolia itself into zones of occupation controlled by foreign powers. Istanbul fell under Allied control, and the once proud capital now answered to foreign officers. For many Ottomans, this was the final humiliation. Nationalist movements began to rally around leaders who refused to accept the treaty. The old imperial system, with its sultans and viziers, was powerless to stop the dismemberment of their state. It seemed the Ottoman Empire had reached its end, a relic of the past swept aside by the forces of modern geopolitics. Yet from its ruins, a new force was rising in Anatolia. The birth of modern Turkey. In 1919, Mustafa Kemal, later known as Ataturk, began organizing resistance against the occupying powers. The Turkish War of Independence raged for 4 years, culminating in the expulsion of foreign forces and the abolition of the Sultanate in 1922. The Treaty of Lausanne in 1923 recognized the sovereignty of the Republic of Turkey, with Ankara as its new capital. The centuries-old Ottoman state was gone, replaced by a modern nation determined to define its own destiny. The legacy of the Ottomans lived on in architecture, law, cuisine, and culture, but the empire itself was consigned to history. Its rise had reshaped the world, and its fall had marked the end of an age. For over 600 years, the Ottoman Empire stood as one of history's great powers, a bridge between East and West, a mosaic of cultures and faiths, a force that shaped continents. Its story is one of ambition and achievement, but also of complacency and decline. From Osman's humble beginnings to the grandeur of Suleiman, from the cannons at Constantinople to the trenches of Gallipoli, its history is a mirror of the human experience, glory and loss, triumph and tragedy. And though the empire has long since vanished, its echoes still resound in the cities, peoples, and nations that once lay beneath its crescent moon.